Hello and welcome to the latest reading from If Only They Could Talk by James Herriot. Today, this time, I'm covering chapters 25 and 26. There are 31 chapters in this book. So in the next video I shall cover 27, 28. And in the last video I shall cover the last three chapters, 29, 30 and 31. But today we read chapter 25 and 26. I realised quite suddenly, that spring had come. It was late March and I had been examining some sheep in a hillside fold. On my way down in the lee of a small pine wood, I leaned my back against a tree and was aware all at once of the sunshine, warm on my closed eyelids, the clamour of the larks, the muted sea sound of the wind in the high branches. And though the snow still lay in long runners behind the walls, and the grass was lifeless and winter-yellowed, there was the feeling of change, almost of liberation, because, unknowing, I had surrounded myself with a carapace against the iron months, the relentless cold. It wasn't a warm spring, but it was dry with sharp winds, which fluttered the white heads of the snowdrops and bent the clumps of daffodils on the village greens. In April the roadside banks were bright with the fresh yellow of the primroses. And in April, too, came the lambing. It came in a great tidal wave, the most vivid and interesting part of the veterinary surgeon's year, the zenith of the annual cycle. And it came as it always does when we were busiest with our other work. In the spring the livestock were feeling the effects of the long winter. Cows had stood for months in the same few feet of byre, and were in dire need of the green grass and the sun on their backs, while their calves had very little resistance to disease. And just when we were wondering how we could cope with the coughs and colds and pneumonias and acetonemias, the wave struck us. The odd thing is that for about 10 months of the year, sheep hardly entered into the scheme of our lives. They were just woolly things on the hills, but for the other 2 months they almost blotted out everything else. First came the early troubles, the pregnancy toxemias, the prolapses, then the lambings in a concentrated rush, followed by the calcium deficiencies, the horrible gangrenous mastitis, when the udder turns black and sloughs away, and the diseases which beset the lambs themselves, swayback, pulpy kidney, dysentery. Then the flood slackened, became a trickle, and by the end of May had almost dried up. Sheep became woolly things on the hills again. But in this first year I found a fascination in the work which has remained with me. Lambing, it seemed to me, had all the thrill and interest of carving without the hard labour. It was usually uncomfortable in that it was performed in the open, either in draughty pens improvised from straw bales and gates, or more often out in the fields. It didn't seem to occur to the farmers that the ewe might prefer to produce her family in a warm place, or that the vet might not enjoy kneeling for hours in his shirt sleeves in the rain. But the actual job was as easy as a song. After my experiences in correcting the malrepresentations of calves, it was delightful to manipulate these tiny creatures. Lambs are usually born in 2s or 3s, and some wonderful mix-ups occur. Tangles of heads and legs all trying to be first out, and it is the vet's job to sort them around and decide which leg belonged to which head. I revelled in this. It was a pleasant change to be for once stronger and bigger than my patient, But I didn't overstress this advantage. I have not changed the opinion I formed then that there are just two things to remember in lambing: cleanliness and gentleness. And the lambs, all young animals, are appealing, but the lamb has been given an unfair share of charm. The moments come back of a bitterly cold evening when I had delivered twins on a wind-scarred hillside, the lambs shaking their heads convulsively, and within minutes one of them struggling upright and making its way, unsteady, knock-kneed, towards the udder, while the other followed resolutely on its knees. The shepherd, his purple, weather-roughened face almost hidden by the heavy coat which muffled him to his ears, gave a slow chuckle. How the hell did I know? He had seen it happen thousands of times, and he still wondered. So do I. And another memory of 200 lambs in a barn on a warm afternoon. We were inoculating them against pulpy kidney, and there was no conversation because of the high-pitched protests of the lambs, and the unremitting deep baaing from nearly 100 ewes milling anxiously around outside. I couldn't conceive how these ewes could ever get their own families sorted out from that mass of almost identical little creatures. It would take hours. It took about 25 seconds. When we had finished injecting, we opened the barn doors, and the outpouring lambs were met by a concerted rush of distraught mothers. At first the noise was deafening, but it died away rapidly to an occasional bleat as the last stray was rounded up. Then, neatly paired off, the flock headed calmly for the field. Through May and early June my world became softer and warmer. The cold wind dropped, and the air, fresh as the sea, carried a faint breath of the thousands of wildflowers which speckled the pastures. At times it seemed unfair that I should be paid for my work, for driving out in the early morning with the fields glittering under the first pale sunshine and the wisps of mist still hanging on the high tops. At Skeldale House the wisteria exploded into a riot of mauve blooms, which thrust themselves through the open windows, and each morning as I shaved I breathed in the heady fragrance from the long clusters drooping by the side of the mirror. Life was idyllic. There was only one jarring note. It was the time of the horse. In the 30s there were still quite a lot of horses on the farms, though the tractors had already sounded their warning knell. In the farms near the foot of the dale, where there was a fair amount of arable land, the rows of stables were half empty, but there were still enough horses to make May and June uncomfortable. This was when the castrations were done. Before that came the foaling, and it was a common enough thing to see a mare with her foal either trotting beside her or stretched flat on the ground as its mother nibbled at the grass. Nowadays the sight of a cart mare and foal in a field would make me pull up my car to have another look. There was all the work connected with the foalings: cleansing the mares, docking the foals' tails, treating the illnesses of the newborn, joint ill, retained meconium. It was hard and interesting, but as the weather grew warmer, the farmers began to think of having the year-old colts castrated. I didn't like the job, and since there might be up to 100 to be done, it cast a shadow over this and many subsequent springs. For generations the operation had been done by casting the colt and tying him up very like a trussed chicken. It was a bit laborious, but the animal was under complete restraint, and it was possible to concentrate entirely on the job. But about the time I qualified, standing castration was coming very much to the fore. It consisted simply of applying a twitch to the colt's upper lip, injecting a shot of local anaesthetic into each testicle, and going straight ahead. There was no doubt it was a lot quicker. The obvious disadvantage was that the danger of injury to the operator and his helpers was increased tenfold. But for all that, the method rapidly became more popular. A local farmer called Kenny Bright, who considered himself an advanced thinker, took the step of introducing it to the district. He engaged Major Farley, the horse specialist, to give a demonstration on one of his colts, and a large gathering of farmers came to spectate. Kenny, smug and full of self-importance, was holding the twitch, and beaming round the company as his protégé prepared to disinfect the operation site. But as soon as the Major touched the scrotum with his antiseptic, the colt reared and brought a 4-foot crashing down on Kenny's head. He was carried away on a gate with his skull fractured and spent a long time in hospital. The other farmers didn't stop laughing for weeks, but the example failed to deter them. Standing castration was in. I said it was quicker. It was when everything went smoothly. But there were other times when the colt kicked or threw himself on top of us or just went generally mad. Out of 10 jobs, 9 would be easy and the 10th would be a rodeo. I don't know how much apprehension this state of affairs built up in other vets, but I was undeniably tense on castration mornings. Of course, one of the reasons was that I was not, am not, and never will be a horseman. It is difficult to define the term, but I am convinced that horsemen are either born or acquire the talent in early childhood. I knew it was no good my trying to start in my mid-20s. I had the knowledge of equine diseases. I believed I had the ability to treat sick horses efficiently, but that power the real horseman had to soothe and quieten and mentally dominate an animal was beyond my reach. I didn't even try to kid myself. It was unfortunate because there is no doubt horses know. It is quite different with cows. They don't care either way. If a cow feels like kicking you, she will kick you. She doesn't give a damn whether you are an expert or not. But horses know. So on those mornings my morale was never very high, as I drove out with my instruments rattling and rolling about on an enamel tray on the back seat. Would he be wild or quiet? How big would he be? I had heard my colleagues airily stating their preference for big horses. The 2-year-olds were far easier. They said you could get a better grip on the testicles. But there was never any doubt in my own mind. I liked them small, the smaller the better. One morning when the season was at its height and I had had about enough of the equine race, Siegfried called to me as he was going out. "James, there's a horse with a tumour on its belly at Wilkinson's of White Cross. Get along and take it off. Today, if possible. But otherwise, fix your own time. I'll leave it with you." Feeling a little disgruntled at fate having handed me something on top of the seasonal tasks, I boiled up a scalpel, tumour spoons and syringe and put them on my tray with local anaesthetic, iodine and tetanus antitoxin. I drove to the farm with the tray rattling ominously behind me. That sound always had a connotation of doom for me. I wondered about the horse. Maybe it was just a yearling. They did get those little dangling growths sometimes. Namberries, the farmers called them. Over the 6 miles I managed to build up a comfortable picture of a soft-eyed little colt with pendulous abdomen and overlong hair. It hadn't done well over the winter and was probably full of worms. Shaky on its legs with weakness, in fact. At Wilkinson's all was quiet. The yard was empty except for a lad of about 10 who didn't know where the boss was. "Well, where is the horse?" I asked. The lad pointed to the stable. "He's in there." I went inside. At one end stood a high, open-topped loose box with a metal grill topping the wooden walls, and from within I heard a deep-throated whinnying and snorting followed by a series of tremendous thuds against the sides of the box. A chill crept through me. That was no little colt in there. I opened the top half door, and there, looking down at me, was an enormous animal. I hadn't realised horses ever came quite as big as this. A chestnut stallion with a proud arch to his neck and feet like manhole covers. Surging swaves of muscles shone on his shoulders and quarters, and when he saw me, he laid back his ears, showed the whites of his eyes, and lashed out viciously against the wall. A foot-long splinter flew high in the air as the great hoof crashed against the boards. God Almighty! I breathed and closed the half door. Hurriedly, I leaned my back against the door and listened to my heart thumping. I turned to the lad. "How old is that horse?" "Over 6 years, sir." I tried a little calm thinking. How did you go about tackling a man-eater like this? I had never seen such a horse. He must weigh over a ton. I shook myself. I hadn't even had a look at the tumour I was supposed to remove. I lifted the latch, opened the door about 2 inches and peeped inside. I could see it plainly dangling from the belly, probably a papilloma, about the size of a cricket ball with a lobulated surface which made it look like a little cauliflower. It swung gently from side to side as the horse moved about. No trouble to take it off. Nice narrow neck to it, a few cc's of local in there, and I could twist it off easily with the spoons. But the snag was obvious. I would have to go under that shining barrel of an abdomen within easy reach of the great feet, and stick a needle into those few inches of skin. Not a happy thought. But I pulled my mind back to practical things, like a bucket of hot water, soap, and a towel, and I'd need a good man on the twitch. I began to walk towards the house. There was no answer to my knock. I tried again. Still nothing. There was nobody at home. It seemed the most natural thing in the world to leave everything till another day. The idea of going round the buildings and fields till I found somebody never entered my head. I almost broke into a gallop on my way to the car, backed it round with the tyres squealing, and roared out of the yard. Siegfried was surprised. "Nobody there? Well, that's a damn funny thing." Sorry about that. Siegfried was surprised. "Nobody there? Well, that's a damn funny thing. I'm nearly sure they were expecting you today. But never mind. It's in your hands, James. Give them a ring and fix it up again as soon as possible." I found it wonderfully easy to forget about the stallion over the days and weeks that followed, except when my defences were down. At least once a night it thundered through my dreams with gaping nostrils and flying mane, and I developed an uncomfortable habit of coming bolt awake at 5 o'clock in the morning and starting immediately to operate on the horse. On an average, I took that tumour off 20 times before breakfast each morning. I told myself it would be a lot easier to fix the job up and get it over. What was I waiting for, anyway? Was there a subconscious hope that if I put it off long enough, something would happen to get me off the hook? The tumour might fall off or shrink away and disappear, or the horse might drop down dead. I could have passed the whole thing on to Siegfried. He was good with horses, but my confidence was low enough without that. All my doubts were resolved one morning when Mr. Wilkinson came on the phone. He wasn't in the least upset at the long delay, but he made it quite clear that he could wait no longer. "You see, I want to sell this horse, young man, but I can't let him go with that thing on him, can I?" My journey to Wilkinson's wasn't enlivened by the familiar clatter of the tray on the back seat. It reminded me of the last time when I was wondering what was ahead of me. This time I knew. Stepping out of the car, I felt almost disembodied. It was like walking a few inches above the ground. I was greeted by a reverberating din from the loose box, the same angry whinnies and splintering crashes I had heard before. I tried to twist my stiff face into a smile as the farmer came over. "My chaps are getting a halter on him," he said, but his words were cut short by an enraged squealing from the box and 2 tremendous blows against the wooden sides. I felt my mouth going dry. The noise was coming nearer. Then the stable doors flew open and the great horse catapulted out into the yard, dragging 2 big fellows along on the end of the halter shank. The cobbles struck sparks from the men's boots as they slithered about, but they were unable to stop the stallion backing and plunging. I imagined I could feel the ground shudder under my feet as the hooves crashed down. At length, after much manoeuvring, the men got the horse standing with his offside against the wall of the barn. One of them looped the twitch onto the upper lip and tightened it expertly. The other took a firm grip on the halter and turned towards me. "Ready for you now, sir." I pierced the rubber cap on the bottle of cocaine, withdrew the plunger of the syringe, and watched the clear fluid flow into the glass barrel. 7, 8, 10 cc's. If I could get that in, the rest would be easy, but my hands were trembling. Walking up to the horse was like watching an action from a film. It wasn't really me doing this. The whole thing was unreal. The near side eye flickered dangerously at me as I raised my left hand and passed it over the muscles of the neck, down the smooth, quivering flank, and along the abdomen till I was able to grasp the tumour. I had the thing in my hand now. The lobulations firm and lumpy under my fingers, I pulled gently downwards, stretching the brown skin joining the growth to the body. I would put the local in there, a few good wheels. It wasn't going to be so bad. The stallion laid back his ears and gave a warning whicker. I took a long, careful breath, brought up the syringe with my right hand, placed the needle against the skin, then thrust it in. The kick was so explosively quick that at first I felt only surprised that such a huge animal could move so swiftly. It was a lightning outward slash that I never even saw, and the hoof struck the inside of my right thigh, spinning me round helplessly. When I hit the ground I lay still, feeling only a curious numbness. Then I tried to move, and a stab of pain went through my leg. When I opened my eyes, Mr. Wilkinson was bending over me. "Are you all right, Mr. Herriot?" The voice was anxious. "I don't think so." I was astonished at the matter-of-fact sound of my own words, but stranger still was the feeling of being at peace with myself for the first time for weeks. I was calm and completely in charge of the situation. "I'm afraid not, Mr. Wilkinson. You'd better put the horse back in his box for now. We'll have a go at him another day, and I wonder if you'd ring Mr. Farnan to come and pick me up. I don't think I'll be able to drive." My leg wasn't broken, but it developed a massive hematoma at the point of impact, and then the whole limb blossomed into an unbelievable range of colours, from delicate orange to deepest black. I was still hobbling like a Crimean veteran when a fortnight later Siegfried and I, with a small army of helpers, went back and roped the stallion, chloroformed him, and removed that little growth. I have a cavity in the muscle of my thigh to remind me of that day, but some good came out of the incident. I found that the fear is worse than the reality, and horsework has never worried me as much since then. Chapter 26. The first time I saw Finn Calvert was in the street outside the surgery, when I was talking to Brigadier Julian Coutts-Brown about his shooting dogs. The Brigadier was almost a stage version of an English aristocrat. Immensely tall, with a pronounced stoop, hawk features and a high drawling voice. As he spoke, smoke from a narrow cigar trickled from his lips. I turned my head at the clatter of heavy boots on the pavement. A thick-set figure was stumping rapidly towards us, hands tucked behind his braces, ragged jacket pulled wide to display a curving expanse of collarless shirt, wisps of grizzled hair hanging in a fringe beneath a greasy cap. He was smiling widely at nobody in particular, and he hummed busy to himself. The brigadier glanced at him. "Morning, Calvert," he grunted coldly. Phineas threw up his head in pleased recognition. "Now then, Charlie, how is't?" he shouted. The brigadier looked as though he had swallowed a swift pint of vinegar. He removed his cigar with a shaking hand and stared after the retreating back. "Impudent devil," he muttered. Looking at Finn, you would never have thought he was a prosperous farmer. I was called to his place a week later, and was surprised to find a substantial house and buildings and a fine dairy herd grazing in the fields. I could hear him even before I got out of the car. Hello. Who's this we've got then? New chap, eh? Now we're going to learn summat." He still had his hands inside his braces, and was grinning wider than ever. "My name is Herriot," I said. "Is it now?" Finn cocked his head and surveyed me, then he turned to 3 young men standing by. "Hasn't he a nice smile, lads? He's a real happy Harry." He turned and began to lead the way across the yard. "Come on then, and we'll see what you're made of. I hope you know a bit about calves, because I've got some here that are right dowly." As he went into the calf house, I was hoping that I would be able to do something impressive, perhaps use some of the new drugs and Sarah I had in my car. It was going to take something special to make an impact here. There were 6 well-grown young animals, almost stark size, and 3 of them were behaving very strangely, grinding their teeth, frothing at the mouth, and blundering about the pen as though they couldn't see. As I watched, one of them walked straight into the wall and stood with its nose pressed against the stone. Finn, apparently unconcerned, was humming to himself in a corner. When I started to take my thermometer from its case, he burst into a noisy commentary. "Now what's he doing?" We're off now. Get up there." The half-minute which my thermometer spends in an animal's rectum is usually devoted to hectic thought. But this time I didn't need the time to work out my diagnosis. The blindness made it easy. I began to look round the walls of the calf house. It was dark, and I had to get my face close to the stone. Finn gave tongue again. "Hey, what's going on? You're as bad as calf's nose in there, dozy like. What do you think you're looking for?" "Paint, Mr. Calvert. I'm nearly sure your calves have got lead poisoning." Finn said what all farmers say at this juncture. "They can't have. I've had calves in here for 30 years, and they've never taken any harm before. There's no paint in here anyway." "How about this then?" I peered into the darkest corner and pulled at a piece of loose board. "Oh, that's no but a bit of wood I nailed down there last week to block up a hole. Came off an old hen house." I looked at the 20-year-old paint hanging off in the loose flakes which calves find so irresistible. "This is what's done the damage," I said. "Look, you can see the tooth marks where they've been at it." Finn studied the board at close quarters and grunted doubtfully. "All right, what do we do now?" "First thing is to get this painted board out of here, and then give all the calves Epsom salts. Have you got any?" Finn gave a bark of laughter. "Aye, I've got a bloody great sackful. But can't you do out better than that? Aren't you going to inject them?" It was a little embarrassing. The specific antidotes to metal poisoning had not been discovered, and the only thing which sometimes did a bit of good was magnesium sulfate, which caused the precipitation of insoluble lead sulfate. The homely term for magnesium sulfate is, of course, Epsom salts. "No," I said, "there's nothing I can inject that will help at all, and I can't even guarantee the salts will. But I'd like you to give the calves 2 heaped tablespoonfuls 3 times a day." "Oh, hell, you'll skitter the poor buggers to death." "Maybe so, but there's nothing else for it," I said. Finn took a step towards me, so that his face, dark-skinned and deeply wrinkled, was close to mine. The suddenly shrewd, mottled brown eyes regarded me steadily for a few seconds. Then he turned away quickly. "Right," he said. "Come in and have a drink." Finn stumped into the farm kitchen ahead of me, threw back his head, and let loose a bellow that shook the windows. "Mother, fella here wants a glass of beer. Come and meet Happy Harry." Mrs. Calvert appeared with magical speed and put down glasses and bottles. I glanced at the labels. Smith's Nutty Brown Ale, and filled my glass. It was a historic moment, though I didn't know it then. It was the first of an incredible series of nutty browns I was to drink at that table. Mrs. Calvert sat down for a moment, crossed her hands on her lap, and smiled encouragingly. "Can you do anything for the calves, then?" she asked. Finn butted in before I could reply. "Oh, aye, he can and all. He's put them on onto Epsom salts." "Epsom salts? That's it, missus." "That's it, missus," I said. "I said when he came that we'd get summat real smart and scientific like. You can't beat no blood and modern ideas." Finn sipped his beer gravely. Over the following days the calves gradually improved, and at the end of a fortnight they were all eating normally. The worst ones still showed a trace of blindness, but I was confident this too would clear up. It wasn't long before I saw Finn again. It was early afternoon, and I was in the office with Siegfried when the outer door banged, and the passage echoed to the clumping of hobnails. I heard a voice raised in song. "Hi-ti tiddly-rum-ta-tum." Phineas was in our midst once more. "Well, well, well," he bawled heartily at Miss Harbottle. "It's Flossie! And what's my little darling doing this fine day?" There was not a flicker from Miss Harbottle's granite features. She directed an icy stare at the intruder, but Finn swung round on Siegfried with a yellow-toothed grin. "Now, Gaffer, how's tricks?" "Everything's fine, Mr. Calvert," Siegfried replied. "What can we do for you?" Finn stabbed a finger at me. "There's my man. I want him out to my place rather sharpish." "What's the trouble?" I asked. "Is it the calves again?" "Damn no. Wish it was. It's me good bull. He's puffing like a bellows. Bit like pneumonia, but worse than I've known. He's in a hell of a state. Looks like he's pegging out." For an instant Finn lost his jocularity. I had heard of this bull, pedigree shorthorn, show winner, the foundation of his herd. "I'll be right after you, Mr. Calvert. I'll follow you along." "Good lad. I'm off then." Finn pawed at the door, a wild figure, tieless, tattered, baggy trousers ballooning from his ample middle. He turned again to Miss Harbottle and contorted his leathery features into a preposterous leer. "Ta-ra, Floss!" he cried, and was gone. For a moment the room seemed very empty and quite quiet, except for Miss Harbottle's acid, "Oh, that man! Dreadful! Dreadful!" I made good time to the farm and found Finn waiting with his 3 sons. The young men looked gloomy, but Finn was still indomitable. "Here he is," he shouted. "Happy Harry again. Now we'll be all right." He even managed a little tune as we crossed to the bullpen, but when he looked over the door, his head sank on his chest, and his hands worked deeper behind his braces. The bull was standing as though rooted to the middle of the pen. I thought it stopped recording then. The bull was standing as though rooted to the middle of the pen. His great rib cage rose and fell with the most laboured respirations I had ever seen. His mouth gaped wide, a bubbling foam hung round his lips and his flaring nostrils. His eyes, almost starting from his head in terror, stared at the wall in front of him. This wasn't pneumonia. It was a frantic battle for breath, and it looked like a losing one. He didn't move when I inserted my thermometer, and though my mind was racing, I suspected the half-minute wasn't going to be long enough this time. I had expected accelerated breathing, but nothing like this. "Poor old beggar," Finn muttered. "He's bred me the finest calves I've ever had, and he's as quiet as a sheep too. I've seen me little grandchildren walk under his belly, and he's took no notice. I hate to see him suffering like this. If he can't do no good, just tell me and I'll get the gun out." I took the thermometer out and read it. 110 degrees Fahrenheit. This was ridiculous. I shook it vigorously and pushed it back into the rectum. I gave it nearly a minute this time so that I could get in some extra thinking. The second reading said 110 again, and I had an unpleasant conviction that if the thermometer had been a foot long, the mercury would still have been jammed against the top. What in the name of God was this? Could be anthrax? Must be. And yet? I looked over at the row of heads above the half door. They were waiting for me to say something, and their silence accentuated the agonizing groaning and panting. I looked above the heads to the square of deep blue and a tufted cloud moving across the sun. As it passed, a single dazzling ray made me close my eyes, and a faint bell rang in my mind. "Has he been out today?" I asked. "Aye, he's been out on the grass on his tether all morning. It was that grand and warm." The bell became a triumphant gong. "Get a hose-pipe in here quick. You can rig it to that tap in the yard." "A hose-pipe? What the hell?" "Yes, quick as you can. He's got sunstroke." They had the hose fixed in less than a minute. I turned it full on and began to play the jet of cold water all over the huge form, his face and neck, along the ribs, up and down the legs. I kept this up for about 5 minutes, but it seemed a lot longer as I waited for some sign of improvement. I was beginning to think I was on the wrong track when the bull gulped just once. It was something. He had been unable to swallow his saliva before in his desperate efforts to get the air into his lungs, and I really began to notice a change in the big animal. Surely he was looking just a little less distressed, and wasn't the breathing slowing down a bit? Then the bull shook himself, turned his head and looked at us. There was an awed whisper from one of the young men. "By God, it's working." I enjoyed myself after that. I can't think of anything in my working life that has given me more pleasure than standing in that pen, directing the life-saving jet and watching the bull savouring it. He liked it on his face best, and as I worked my way up from the tail and along the steaming back, he could turn his nose full into the water, rocking his head from side to side and blinking blissfully. Within half an hour he looked almost normal. His chest was still heaving a little, but he was in no discomfort. I tried the temperature again, down to 105. "He'll be all right now," I said, "but I think one of the lads should keep the water on him for another 20 minutes or so. I'll have to go now." "You've time for a drink?" Finn grunted. In the farm kitchen his bellow of "Mother!" lacked some of its usual timbre. He dropped into a chair and stared into his glass of nutty brown. "Harry," he said, "I'll tell you, you flummoxed me this time." He sighed and rubbed his chin in apparent disbelief. "I don't know what the hell to say to you." It wasn't often that Finn lost his voice, but he found it again very soon at the next meeting of the farmers' discussion group. A learned and earnest gentleman had been expounding on the advances in veterinary medicine, and how the farmers could now expect their stock to be treated as the doctors treated their human patients, with the newest drugs and procedures. It was too much for Finn. He jumped to his feet and cried, "I think you're talking a lot of rubbish. There's a young fellow in Darrowby not long out of college, and it doesn't matter what you call him out, for he uses nowt but Epsom salts and cold water."